You're listening to the Life Purpose Advisor podcast, episode 54.
So it's interesting because to me, your chart is very much that of a true coach, a mentor. There's this way that you really deeply are driven to help other people see themselves and help them develop their own confidence.
You're listening to the Life Purpose Advisor podcast.
Life purpose, spirituality, higher calling, personal growth, meaningful life.
We ask the deep questions about living a balanced life of meaning, purpose, and joy.
Passion, know thyself, be mindful, spiritual practice, aha moments, life lessons, balance.
It is time to welcome your host, Angie Swartz.
Hello, this is Angie Swartz, and welcome to Special Edition Episode 54, our second show of the week. Molly Morrissey joins me again, but this time she uses me as her subject to illustrate how astrology can be a useful tool. Molly is a traditional astrologer and a resilience coach, and today she'll take my birth date, November 2nd, and tell me what it reveals about me. Yesterday, on episode 53, the November 2nd show, I interviewed Molly about her life, her journey, her work, and her life purpose. You can listen to episode 53 at www.lifepurposeadvisor.com/53. Today, Molly will be illustrating the work that she does with astrology using me as her client. Specifically, Molly has taken my birth date, my time of birth, my location of birth, and she'll be using it to do a live astrological reading about me, my innate patterns, and where I'm at in my development. I have not seen this information before the recording. As we discussed in more detail yesterday, the reason that I asked Molly to do this reading is because I believe all tools teach us to know ourselves better in some way, and they tell us something about our life purpose. I wanted you to hear from my experience what an astrological reading can be like and to see for yourself if this is something that might be helpful to you. You can find all the references that we make on today's show in our show notes page at lifepurposeadvisor.com/54. And don't forget to tune into episode 53 to hear more about Molly and the work that she does. And with that, I'm turning the show over to Molly Morrissey. Molly, welcome back.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thanks. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. So let's begin, like I do all of my sessions, with a brief rundown of what's about to happen. What we're going to do today is now, for the listeners, I've already had Angie go through my typical intake process for my single session birth chart consult session. And so that is comprised of her listening to an audio, which is about 30 minutes long, which gives her some information about the session and the astrological component. And then there's also some information that helps her then answer a questionnaire, which usually takes people about 45 minutes to fill out. I don't know, maybe it looks like yours maybe it might have taken a little less. And it's a way for me to get some background information. And I always am clear with people that now I'm not a fortune teller, and I don't do a lot of I'm not psychic. So my process is really about helping identify patterns that are already existing, and using the traditional astrological tool to just help further articulate what has already gone on so that we can understand what is possibly going to go on into the future. And also looking at where she's at within some development cycles. So with that, the other piece that the listeners will need to understand is that one of the main tools or one of the main concepts that I use in the traditional world was called the four temperaments, but they are also known as the four elements: water, fire, earth, and air. And it's kind of a way to begin the work. One of the things that I do is move pretty quickly into what's specific about Angie and what she can then specifically kind of be looking for as she moves through her development and grapples with how she's going to grow her business or, what she's doing in her personal life and things like that. But it's always nice to kind of have a language that we can use to come back to and to kind of use to describe things. So we will start then with that temperament, with looking at using the 4 elements to talk about Angie's basic personality, and then we'll move into those specifics. So when I initially looked at Angie's chart, I asked her some questions about how she has sort of, experienced herself. And so, Angie, you talked a lot about that you do really feel like you're fairly balanced. And if anything, when you were younger, you felt like there was a little bit more fire, which is about doing and being kind of assertive, and a little bit more also air, which is about communication and information and wanting to kind of be in the world of ideas and concepts. And there's more to each of these 4 types, but we're kind of boiling it right down to the basics here for this conversation. So, and then, Angie, you also reported that you felt like as an adult so far in your adult life, you've really kind of been fairly balanced between the 4. So the other 2 would be Earth, which is really being analytical and being kind of contemplative and being able to kind of be really practical and be engaged in what's actually happening now, kind of be engaged with reality. And also maybe less so this final one, which is water, which is the feelings, the desire nature. And that you've kind of really, you feel like right now the water maybe recently is starting to kind of emerge more for you. But that the other 3 in your professional life have been very strong. Would you agree with that still?
I would, and I would say that I think water has maybe always been very strong for me, but maybe I didn't pay as much attention to it. I think I wasn't nurtured to pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way you put it in the intake. So thanks for that. So what in my analysis, one of the things, so when I'm looking at a birth chart, one of the things that I'm doing is there's a handful of things that I'm looking at and that I kind of work through. The basic temperament, so the sort of if you're really fiery or really watery, I do that. And then there's a couple of other sort of technical things that I work through to get a particular view of the general overall temperament. And what I'm always looking for is imbalance. I'm looking, because if somebody has a little bit of each of the 4, that's pretty typical. So what I'm looking for is somebody who's got, lots of fire or lots of water, or because each of the elements is made up of dryness and moisture, or hot, cold, I'm looking for somebody who's really got a very dry temperament, or somebody who's just very, really hot, really active. And so your temperament, Angie, actually is interesting. You don't really there's not a lot of air in your chart. And so then what I'm doing also is I'm looking at what I see compared to what I heard you talk about. And then in making sense of that, I'm able to kind of start to understand the way your personality works. So knowing that you really relate to the air, but I don't see it in your chart really at all. One of the things that then strikes me to begin with is you've got a lot of planets in the part of the chart that talks about other people and other people's resources. And so, and especially Venus, which is the planet that represents relationships, and your Sun, which is the planet that really kind of talks about the energy of your life and kind of what the big overriding sort of focus can be. Those planets are sitting in the part of your chart that really talks a lot about relationship and other people. And so what that tells me is that it's not so much as you having a real desire to communicate concepts and be managing information. And so you're not doing the work you're doing because you want to be a writer or you want to be a real communicator. You're doing it because you're kind of other-oriented. And so what that helps me understand is that it's not so much the information in and of itself that's important to you, but the process and the communication with other people. Does that make sense?
I think so. I bet you're going to tell me more, though.
Yeah, I am. And so that's kind of so then what I know is that as we talk about the places where you're into communication, again, we want to keep in mind that it's not really so much the expression of information that's important to you. It's not really that sanguine, airy stuff that's really what you want to do as much as it's more about the relationships that you're developing. It's more about helping other people and being other-oriented that's important. There's plenty of people out there who are doing even coaching work that really are wanting to kind of educate people and kind of transfer concepts. And so to kind of remember that that's not necessarily your focus. But what is your focus then is this other orientation. Now, to get more specific on that, again, we are going to kind of then look at the sun and the moon, and then a couple of other points that aren't planets are really important in the birth chart. And again, one thing that sets the tradition apart from the modern stuff is that when we look at the sun and the moon, we're not actually looking at the sign that they're in. So, with your sun being in Scorpio, you will have always identified as a Scorpio. But what I would look at then more primarily is the fact that your birthday, the Scorpio sign, is actually in the autumn season. So I'm coming back into that 4-quadrant system. And the autumn season is melancholic. It's earthy. So there's a way in which when the sun is in a melancholic and in an earthy sign, again, there's a desire to be contemplative, to understand, to want to kind of go deeply into things. And across the 3 signs that make up that autumn season, you're going to see that. Now, how do you want to be contemplative and understand deep things? Well, the sun, then, that's where we come to the sign in Scorpio in a deep, watery, sort of emotional way. So then there's a thing about knowing that the sun is in the 7th house. So who do you want to do that with? Well, other people, like clients, partner, just kind of generally speaking, not necessarily yourself as much as other people. And that's kind of a delineation. And not necessarily like your family members or good friends. You're not necessarily interested in really helping the people who are maybe, in your family. You're not as focused on how, of course, you're going to be good at doing those relationships, but you're not specifically, again, driven as a purpose thing to be really focused on family. You can look around and we all know people who are really focused on helping their family flourish, or people who are really focused on helping their company flourish. But for you, it really is other people. So clients, love relationship, that 7th and 8th house type stuff. And so, again, in what way? You want to go very deeply with people. You want to go into the understanding of the root of things. Scorpio is a water sign, which is very much oriented toward fully exploring the desire nature. And so there's a way in which you probably are good with your clients at really kind of getting into the root of things for people. And so, kind of not surprisingly, that you're wanting to look at life purpose, which is kind of a root way of looking at another person's, at their personality and what they have going on, is to really get into what is the life purpose? What's the one thing that you're doing? That's not an exploration that you can do in a surface sort of a way. And I would imagine you get feedback from your clients that you help them get to the heart of the matter. I don't know. Would you say that's true?
Definitely.
Okay. And help them, and then what I would say is help them also access those emotional triggers. You're probably good at helping your clients really get down to, like, the, for better or worse, the murky parts of the emotion, like what's really going on that's driving them. So kind of keeping that in mind, then let's kind of pull back again and look at some other parts of the personality so we can kind of start to fill out the rest of the picture. So when we look at the moon, then the moon talks about the emotions, and that can be sort of how do we take care of ourselves when we're feeling really good and really happy, and, it can indicate how we manage, bad habits, how do we nurture, what do we need to nurture ourselves when we're upset. which is a great thing to know, or to kind of have confirmed. Some people like to clean the house when they're really upset. Some people like to go for a run. There's a full range of things that people like to do that really feed them when they're very upset. So your moon is in Cancer, down at the very bottom of the chart. And again, the chart is a circle that's kind of cut into 12 pieces of pie. And those pieces of pie are called houses, and each house represents a particular part of life. Now, you may not have stuff, and most people have a variety of their houses that are empty. And they'll be like, oh, my God, does that mean I don't have anything in that part of my life? And I'll say, no, of course not. But what we do is we look at the sign that's on the cusp, the beginning of that house, and then we just look at the planet that rules that sign to tell us about. But that's kind of getting into the technical stuff, which we don't need to do too much. But so your moon being in Cancer, the moon rules Cancer, so it's in its home territory. And what happens when we're at home? Well, we can do whatever we want. We have access to our own resources. If we want to go digging around in the fridge to find some goodies, we can do that. Like if we're at other people's houses, or if we're in another city, you can't just kind of go root around in the fridge. So a planet being in its sign that it rules is kind of it's in its strongest position. And so your moon is your strongest planet in the chart in terms of being kind of having access to its own nature, being able to do what it wants to do without a lot of obstruction. And so what does the moon in Cancer do? Well, it wants to feel. So that's going to tell me that you are going to be somebody with really strong emotional reactions to things. And not necessarily like big outward drama emotions, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But you're going to have good instincts. The moon is the fastest planet of the 7. And so when you've got a strong moon, it's able to react very quickly. So it's able to be in touch with its instinct. You're probably somebody who takes a really quick read on events and people when you first meet them. And that's probably something that you've had your whole life and, again, maybe not been so aware of. And the reason why you have not been so aware of that is that its placement down there at the very bottom of the chart, if we think about the chart as, think about where you're sitting at your desk right now, if you look left or right, that's the horizon, right? And if you look up, you see the sky. And if you look down, all you see is the floor. You can't see what's beneath it. So a lot of times planets that are beneath the horizon in the chart indicate stuff that can be a little hidden, potentially. Now, your moon is right down there on the 4th house cusp, and the 4th house is about home and family. And then it's also at the very bottom of the chart, so there's kind of 2 separate meanings that are there. And when we have a planet that's sitting there, it can kind of be like this thing that's buried deeply inside of us. It can represent some stuff that's, kind of buried deep inside of us. And so interesting to me that you feel like you've always been intuitive, or you've always had this sensitivity, and you've always kind of had, a certain amount of emotional intelligence, but you're only now kind of beginning to really see it and beginning to use it. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I think what I would add then, what we're learning from this is there is this emotional intelligence that you've always had. And I would say, knowing that it's your strongest planet, the more you can do to really allow and learn about how your emotional faculty works, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. Any classes you can take around how to kind of harness your intuition, or to learn about, kind of the way that you experience your intuition or your feelings is always going to be work that's going to really pay off for you. That moon being in Cancer means that there's a certain amount of truth. It's in its own sign. It's kind of got a certain amount of goodness to it. So a planet, when it's in its own sign, it's kind of good. It's not corrupt. And so there's a way in which the emotions you're feeling are right, and are kind of expressed properly. Which doesn't always mean that you're right, of course, but that, the feelings that you're having are true. There's a lot of people that have a hard time getting in touch with their feelings, or have a hard time kind of deciphering what that means, what they're trying to tell them to do, and you're not going to really have so much that problem. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so I think then the other piece of this is the planet that's the strongest, that's kind of got the most power to kind of wield in this particular way. It's called the Lord of the Geniture. It's kind of this old traditional term. And I always love that term. It kind of sounds mysterious a little bit. But what it means is that, again, it's the planet that's kind of the least corrupted. It's kind of got the most access to its own ability to kind of act in its own way. So it's kind of the most pure. And what we see with this planet oftentimes is that as the person ages, that Lord of the Geniture planet becomes, and this is kind of a real traditional thing. The modern astrologers don't use it at all, and I always kind of wonder why. I think they don't even know about it, so I'm not sure. But what it shows is that as we age, this planet wants more and more to get expressed. Because it's kind of one of the planets that we can look to, because it's this good thing in us that wants to kind of have some spotlight and kind of and be used. And I think that this shows up when we think of what's our highest good. You know, when we talk about in self-awareness circles, we talk about kind of what's our highest good, or what's our highest power, or what's our, you know, kind of our highest potential. I often find with clients that there's a sliver of that Lord of the Geniture planet that really speaks to that thing that we think we can do when we're being our best, because it represents this sort of purity that we have. And so, again, for you, I think that there's this emotional intelligence that you're just starting to uncover. That makes a lot of sense to me, that it's just starting to kind of gain prominence in your consciousness. And so, yeah, I would just really encourage you to continue to really support that. And then I think in terms of the fact that it has always been there, again, it's going to be something that's going to, you know, with the clients, of course, you know, you mentioned in the intake that you really felt like you had always been able to kind of really have a strong sense of what other people were feeling, or kind of, you know, things that maybe they might not be able to verbalize. And again, I think that goes back to that moon placement, and especially knowing that it's kind of buried down there in that fourth house. Think what that's going to kind of speak to is, again, it's kind of been hidden. So, you know, I think the work you can do to make it more conscious and kind of really study how it has worked for you. Now, I think one of the downsides to this placement is, of course, the moon, like I said, is the fastest planet. Sometimes there might be kind of, especially maybe in times of stress, there may be a pattern of kind of quickly reacting to things. And again, because it's such a resource for you, it's like you just kind of go straight into, hey, I already know what I want to do. Would you say that's true sometimes?
What would be an example?
Like, just kind of like react, like sometimes when you're not paying attention, all of a sudden you just react to something. And then, like, you know, maybe an hour later, a couple hours later, you're like, oh, well, yeah, that was true, but God, maybe I could have said that a different way. Or maybe I could have, like, I could have reacted to that a little bit. I could have given myself some space to chew on that a little bit more than I did.
I think that was true in my younger years. I don't know if this makes sense for the reading that you're doing, but it feels like since I have begun nurturing the moon that you're talking about, and evolving more, that ability or that reaction that you just described, I'm not very likely to do that very often.
Great. Well, it would always be
I think it's still there. I probably still have the ability to do that, but
yes.
I don't see it happening much.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, and again, you know, different people, you know, one thing you cannot get from the chart is how, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, gosh, you're really spiritually advanced. And you cannot tell that from an astrological chart. You see what is there, and you have to talk to the person to find out what they've actually done with it. You can't. And thank God you can't tell how spiritually advanced somebody is from their birth chart, because that, again, would be very dangerous. And so then the other piece that I wanted to throw in about this is, in terms of nurturing yourself when you're upset, there would be some indication that you're kind of, when you get really upset, you kind of want to go home. You know, you kind of want to go to source. You want to go to, you know, you kind of want to kind of go into your little clamshell and kind of nurture yourself. You know, you're not the person that when you're really upset, it's like, yeah, let's go buy some plane tickets and travel everywhere. You'd be like, well, yes, but I need to have a couple of days at home first.
Right.
Which
That's true.
Okay. So, and again, I always like to kind of point those things out just to kind of be on the table with that is, in times of great stress, you are definitely one of those people then that I would say, yeah, you know what, go withdraw for a while. Take things off your calendar. Be conscious of making space for yourself to be private. That's going to be really nurturing for you. Don't feel bad about that. That's going to be one of those things that's just what you need, particularly to kind of regenerate. Now, a couple of interesting things then. Your Mars placement. Mars is the planet he's the doer. He's the warrior. He's the guy that's got the sword. So he's the guy that's just like, hey, I'm out there busy making action. And so in our chart, he indicates how we like to act. And here's what's awesome. I love working with solopreneurs, people who've got their own business, because their marketing, if they've been in business for any length of time, you can almost just read it right out of the chart. So your Mars is in Virgo. And Virgo is a sign that's ruled by Mercury, which is all about articulating. And so Mars in Virgo wants to act in a particular way, wants to kind of be maybe a little fastidious with things. Now, when I look at your work history, you've definitely done a lot of work where you had to kind of be really organized, reorganizing and putting in structure into businesses that you were working in. And it sounds like keeping a lot of balls in the air. So one of the things is that you probably like to have things just so in a certain way. But what's interesting then is when we look at you working with life purpose, kind of being able to zero in on a particular thing, that would be Mars and Virgo. So there's a way in which for your clients, what you're helping them do is zero in and articulate a particular thing. It's one of the things you were probably good at in different ways when you worked in the tech world. Because you were probably good at kind of, again, sort of saying, well, we need to do this particular thing in this order, because this is kind of, again, that process improvement stuff that you did. You were able to articulate a process. And articulating a process is kind of articulating doing. So again, more than coaches, or just more than other people in general, you're probably good at seeing the particular order that things need to happen in. And again, if we think about Mars being doing and Virgo being articulating, with clients, you're probably good at helping them once you're working through your process, kind of helping them order their process. Even an emotional one, because again, we know now that you're somebody who's got this great level of emotional intelligence, but there's plenty of people who are intuitive and emotionally intelligent that aren't good at being organized. So you've kind of got this interesting combination of two things which are sort of pretty different. Does that make sense?
That would be what people have said about me for years, and it's unusual. Like, it doesn't usually show up in the same package, I think, all that often.
No, and that's why it really stands out in your chart. A lot of people that have as much, especially the Scorpio, are kind of, again, real deep, conceptual people and aren't necessarily good at being that fastidious. And so that's, and especially with the being fastidious around the doing. I mean, again, I think you can be fastidious around the way you talk or the way that you, create structure. And there's a certain amount of that for you, but it's really in the doing that you're able to articulate. So being able to organize the energy of a thing. And so again, I don't know, if you, as you continue to think about your client work and how that develops, I would really encourage you to spend some time thinking about that aspect of how you work with your clients, and if that's something that you enjoy doing, helping them understand their own, their own ways of organizing themselves. I would really encourage you to kind of grow that. It's something that is really particular, especially because you're not sacrificing that kind of thing that could be potentially more task oriented. A lot of people that are very task oriented sacrifice that process work. And to me, seeing your chart, you're like, the process work is the point. So it's just like, hey, let's get organized so we can have time for the process work, or so that we can more efficiently delve into the depth that needs to be addressed. And so, gosh, again, a real unique thing that you have to offer there. And then another piece of this And this is kind of where we're going to sort of root around, and I'm not quite sure how it shows up. So this is part of what happens is I'll see something, and I'm like, I don't really get how it shows up, so I'll describe it to you. And then you tell me kind of what fits, and we'll kind of work our way there together. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does a little bit intimidating because we're doing this live today, but
that's the fun of it.
For those of you that are listening, this is the bonus episode. So
yeah.
I'm usually a very transparent person, and I don't get nervous very often, but this is a little bit challenging, even though, Molly, you're doing a wonderful job putting me at ease. But let's do it.
Well, before we jump into this then, I mean, is there anything that you have questions about that we've kind of talked through so far?
I feel, no, I don't think I have any, nothing sounds like it doesn't fit me. Okay. There's no surprises.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a little bit ahead of the game on many of the things that you're talking about. Like, for example, I've been coaching executives I've been an executive myself, but realized that I'd rather be coaching executives and coaching leaders and growing leaders versus being the person that's in the trenches doing those things for many years before I started doing life purpose work. And as with many people, and as we talked about you and your purpose on your interview, these things really evolve. So it's interesting seeing the reading that you're doing and how I've progressed along the line through all of these things so far.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And we'll kind of talk about what's coming next then here in just a few minutes. Now, how are you doing kind of just with the experience of hearing on all of this?
Good.
Okay.
Good. I do a lot of, I'm a very curious person. As you probably know everything about me now looking at my chart. But,
no, I actually don't.
But I like to experience many different tools, and I'm very interested in personal development and very interested in continuing to develop the Know Thyself module of my own program. So to do that, I like to step into tools to understand how they help others.
Cool.
So very open-minded about hearing everything you have to say.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to talk about then is the spiritual stuff. So in your chart, there's a set of points that are not planets, but that are sort of a deeper octave of each of the planets. So I mainly focus on the 7 traditional planets. So there are 7 of these points. And I'll describe the lunar one just because it's actually referred to oftentimes in the astrological literature. It's kind of the most kind of popular of these points. So we just talked about how the moon is kind of all about emotions and desire, and so they're called the Arabic parts, and they were kind of they came into use in the after the fall of Rome, when a lot of the knowledge of the world kind of went into Persia, and Persia kind of became what we would call the Dark Ages. Was actually not the Dark Ages. It was the kind of the classical period for the Persian culture, and because a lot of the people that wrote the history books were Western, they didn't want to kind of admit that, so they just called it the Dark Ages, like nothing was going on. But so, kind of where I'm talking like 300 to maybe like 900 AD. And so during this time, these Arabics, they came up, one of the things that they did was they figured out these points. And there's a ton of them, but the Arabic points that we're talking about, one for each of the planets, they kind of go a little deeper. So if we think about the moon and, our feelings and our desire, if we kind of go a little deeper into that, we get into that deep thing that motivates us. And the moon part is called the part of fortune, or fortuna. And a lot of the modern astrologers kind of would say that that's where our fortune is to be had. And maybe that's true in some way. But the way that I was taught is that because it's a deeper level of the emotions, it's actually like the thing that we deeply hunger for, because the emotions are really this, desire, what we want. And so when you look at the part of fortune, or the moon part, we're actually starting to see what the person deeply, deeply, deeply desires. And usually what we're deeply desiring, we'll like do anything to get. So it's that place where so my teacher calls it the part of hunger, the thing that we deeply hunger for. And it's a great thing to look at because you can kind of see, like, it's oftentimes not that conscious. And if it is conscious, it's kind of conscious in the way that it's always been a part of everything we've done. We haven't maybe necessarily paid so much attention to it. And so for you, yours is actually over there in Scorpio. And so we would look at Mars to tell us about it. And we've kind of already talked about Mars, but so, what it would tell me, and this isn't exactly what we're going to talk about, I'm using this mostly as an example, is that, there's this deep hunger that you have to kind of be really understanding, so it's over in the 8th house, other people's resources. There's this way that you really want to deeply help other people manage their own emotions. So knowing that it's in Scorpio, and especially, knowing that it's Mars in Virgo, which is all about this articulating energy thing we just talked about, that there's this like deep hunger that you have to help people kind of, organize, and I think it's kind of what you're doing. Your purpose work, kind of help them organize their own. So it's really actually not about you at all, helping them organize their own motivation. So it's like interesting because to me, like your chart is very much that of a true coach, a mentor. And I see I work with a lot of other coaches, and everybody's kind of got their own way that they're a coach, but there's this way that you really deeply are driven to help other people see themselves and help them develop their own confidence. The 8th house is other people's resources, including their internal resources. So it is often about helping people manage their own confidence and their own ability to, and frankly, it's also other people's resources in terms of finances. So interesting that you were doing financial work at one point. And not surprising that you moved on because that financial work wouldn't have given you the depth that you were, hungering for. But when we come to, does that make sense?
Sounds delicious.
Yeah. And so when we come then to the spiritual piece, so the 9th house is where the spiritual pursuit fit. The 9th house is about education and long distance travel and all the ways that we get bigger, all the ways that we expand ourselves. And it's got a natural affinity with Jupiter, the largest planet, who kind of, because he's the largest planet, he talks about how we get bigger. And, Jupiter's all about all things noble. So the 9th house, we can look at, we could talk about your Jupiter placement to talk about all of your spiritual stuff. But what's interesting is that this deeper part of Saturn sits right on the beginning of the 9th house cusp. And so what that means is that Saturn's the planet of structure and responsibility, and he's Earth, right? He's very solid. He's the old hermit. And what does the old hermit do? He goes and sits in the cave and knows everything about the universe. So Saturn rules time and rules reality, how things really are. And, and he can kind of be a tough guy to deal with. Because he can be pretty, can be pretty heavy. He's the Earth, one of the Earth planets. He rules things like walls and rocks. And for a lot of people, they experience Saturn as kind of the tough guy in the zodiac. So the part of Saturn, this deeper placement, is called the part of captivity, and it's the place where we feel caught. But another reading of this is it's the place where we get wisdom from experience. And so knowing that part is sitting right on the cusp of your 9th house, there's going to be something about almost like a skepticism that shows up for you with especially kind of spiritual, religious stuff. And there's going to be a way in which probably at some point you've kind of been burned. Like maybe you believed in stuff or believed in a person or believed in something as kind of like a mentor that kind of burned you. So there's that wisdom from experience piece. But the thing that's interesting then is there's also going to be a way in which this is part of what you particularly have to give, because there's going to be a way in which you particularly understand the pitfalls of that ninth house path. You know, a lot of us are like, oh yeah, travel and spiritual and yes, please. And you're going to be like, yes, and you have to be careful. So there's going to be some, and so that's what I'm curious to hear you talk about a little bit, is like, you know, how does that resonate, or is there something that has happened for you that you'd be willing to disclose, or if not, you can say, hey, you know, I'd prefer to not, you know, talk about this later when this isn't public, but I thought that this might be kind of an interesting point to explore with you a little bit if you're willing.
I am. I don't know that I can pull up any time that I feel like I've been burnt by any particular person or any spiritual leader or anything like that.
Okay.
But I think just in digesting that a little bit, I think that I've already gone through what it is you're talking about in going. I think I've had several experiences in my life, both religious, spiritual, and not, where I've had a sensation of looking behind the curtain and seeing that there's no wizard, and knowing that that the journey is within. And so when it comes trying to translate what you said, when it comes to exploration and trying out all of the different esoteric things that are out there. So, for example, every different let's say some people want to go do peyote and have that experience, or some people want to work with the dark side, or some people want to experience every kind of spiritual reader that is out there. I don't feel a need to do those things or to track down every person that has some kind of different intuitive ability any longer, although I did feel that way at some point. Because I have an innate understanding of what my belief system is and where I am, at least today, with regard to the universe. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
well, it sounds like what I'm hearing, and so what I'm doing right now is I'm listening for the Saturn, and Saturn is, you know, like I said, he represents kind of the places where we narrow in, or the places where we, you know, have to kind of deal with reality, or the heavy or the earthy things. And I'm kind of thinking about the spiritual, you know, so I'm looking at the patterns. Again, I'm kind of doing archetypal sort of exploration here. And so what it sounds like there's a way in which that Saturn ruling reality, kind of like, you know what, here it is, this is just what it is, that you are able to sort of translate that. You don't get a lot of people with the ninth house stuff, it's a lot of carrots being dangled. And there's a lot of possibility in the ninth house stuff. Because it's Jupiter, you know, and Jupiter's kind of Santa Claus, really. And there's a relation, there's kind of an affinity between the ninth house and Jupiter. And so you're kind of like, yeah, I don't need Santa Claus. Like, I got what I have here is wonderful, and it's kind of enough. It sounds like that's what you're saying, is that you're able to kind of find it, like you said, within, and you don't need to go there. You don't need to go out to all of these places to have that experience.
I think there was certainly a time when I felt like I did, and in fact, I used to date a man many years ago who used to say my theme song was U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, in relationship to not just relationships but many things, because I was on a very big seeker and on a very big quest for different things, and not even as it relates to spirituality or religion. But through some very deep work and the help of some very great teachers, I got to a different place with those things and a different understanding of what true growth was going to be for me.
Yeah, and I would say this piece is not necessarily a piece that would particularly show up in your professional work. Again, I mean, and not that it wouldn't, but I don't know that I would necessarily start going, okay, and here's how you can help your clients about this. But I would just sort of say, yeah, this part is definitely kind of, when we get to these Arabic parts, I think we are talking about some of our deeper motivations and our deeper levels of, you know, like my teacher always says, we're kind of starting to approach the soul. And, of course, we can't see the soul in the birth chart. But he always sort of says it's kind of that thing that's in the middle where there's an empty hole. The soul's undefinable. But we can, it's the best step we can take to sort of go past what's going on in our everyday life and kind of get a little closer to the soul. We can kind of sneak up on it a little bit when we look at the Arabic parts. And so there's this thing about the spiritual pursuit for you that you've gotten clear that it's definitely not outside of you, and you don't feel like a motivation, and for the age that you are, I would say that that's probably unusual. I mean, do you feel like that's unusual that you've kind of gotten to that, what might be a place of peace around that, maybe earlier than people that are around your age?
I know a few people that are my age, and I would have to really think about what is the similarity between that group of people. But it's not hundreds of people.
Yeah,
it's a smaller group than that. And in terms of my life, I would say I've always been on some cycle to arrive at things earlier. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say that is maturity. It's just the cycle that I'm in. Even at a very young age, I was experiencing things earlier. And same with being ready to start a second career. I was there at 35. Most people are not there until maybe 45. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would say part of that is that fast-moving moon. I mean, you're moving.
I am definitely moving.
Well, and the fact that it's in that placement at the very root of your chart, there's a root, kind of an essential piece of you that's just kind of moving quickly. But I think this piece. So what I think is the takeaway here from listening is again, to pay attention to this. This is going to be something that at some point probably will come back up again. And I would kind of pay attention. I would sort of just pay attention how it shows up for you that might be different from other people. And again, I'm always looking for what's different. In that there's a way in which you aren't, because Saturn, again, he's Earth. He doesn't need to go anywhere. He just wants to stay there. He's the hermit. Hermit's tucked away back in the cave. And there's a way in which, when it comes to the spiritual stuff, when again, education, long distance travel, that you're kind of you're not as you're not maybe as needing to go out to other places or seek it as much as other people might be. And that there may be some of the wisdom that you draw that comes from the fact that you have found kind of what you need in that hermity way. Even if you can't define it, that there's kind of just some sense that it's there, it's fine. You don't need to go seeking. I would just kind of pay attention to that, see how it develops, especially, maybe if it's years down the road, the next time you are having a tough time, we all go through periods where things get challenging. I would certainly if you can remember, to kind of check back in with that at that point. How can that piece of wisdom that you've attained, how can that serve you at that point? That would be, because it may be a little bit of a counterintuitive, at that point in a stressful time of life. A lot of people would sort of say, oh yeah, you need to rely on your faith. And you'd be like, no, there's something inside of me that I have to rely on, and I need to go find that again. Does that make sense? That's kind of a little different focus than what normally you might do during a time of stress?
A little bit. I think I have to digest that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. The stuff with these Arabic parts is we're getting into territory that's not on the surface. So and that's why I always say it's kind of a fun thing to talk about with people, because it's definitely stuff that needs to be digested down the road and kind of sit with it and see what resonates. I always tell people, see what resonates, take what does, leave the rest. And so anyhow, I think, if you have other friends that you feel like have gotten to a certain level of kind of maybe spiritual development, so to speak, that you feel comfortable talking to, it'd be something to chat with them. How do they, just to kind of start to learn about your own self, how do they feel about this stuff, this internal wisdom that you feel like you've kind of come to? Mm-hmm. Just so that you can start to define your own way, so to speak.
Yes, I'm actively in a group that does just that. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great. There it is. So yeah, I would encourage that exploration, and again, especially looking at that Saturn-y stuff. How do you, questions you could maybe ask yourself around this, or how do you take responsibility for your spiritual development in a way that's unique? Go back into, so for the listeners, when you do this work, you get a little guide to each of the planets that I give that gives some reference points for what each planet represents. So you could go back into that guide and just look at the words that are there with Saturn and see what resonates in relation to your spiritual pursuits or your, that pilgrimage, and just kind of start to pay attention to that and see what pops up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
And again, that's something where I wouldn't necessarily tell anybody else to do that sort of homework. So that would be homework that would be specific for you.
Of course.
If anybody else is listening, anybody could go do that, but you're going to get specific out of it in a way that other people have something else that they would be doing. So their little piece of homework would be something different. And that's kind of one of the things that's always fun about doing something like this is, it's kind of, there are some disclaimers that need to get put on this. Like what I'm talking to you about is stuff that's especially important to you. It's not, while it might sound good to somebody else, it's not going to necessarily be what's especially important to them. And that's kind of one of the caveats is that, is to kind of keep that in mind as we're moving through here. So just checking in with time then, how are you, what questions do you have?
I have a more earthly tactical question about what you said about travel and long distance places and things like that. I'm really a big lover of travel. Mm-hmm. And how does that, from a leisure standpoint and adventure travel, and as it relates to connecting with others and learning? So how do you see that showing up on the chart, or is that similar to what you were saying, like I'm done with that?
No. And see, this is where I think, and that's a great question. So when we're talking about these Arabic parts, like I said, we're getting into this inner part of ourselves that, like I said, starts to approach the soul. Knowing that the soul is this almighty thing that we can only ever grasp out of our peripheral vision. The soul is not the flimsy thing in the modern literature that, my soul wants chocolate. No, but your soul does not want chocolate. Your desire does. So kind of remembering that delineation, that when we're talking about that, then when I'm talking about those Arabic parts, I'm immediately taking the most kind of ethereal definition of each of the houses. I am going to go into that deeper place. When we start talking about travel, I'm just talking about Natal stuff. I'm going to look at your Jupiter. Let's talk about that. So we're going to come back up to the more day-to-day way that I can read the chart. So I'm going to kind of leave that Arabic part, deeper soul level stuff aside, unless you felt like when you travel, that's like you are doing your deep spiritual work. And from what you just said, you feel like travel's fun, it's enjoyable, and so, and especially the way that you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, we're talking about Jupiter stuff now. Your Jupiter's in your 5th house, so Jupiter rules and this is what I'm talking about, Jupiter.
Let me go back before you move on.
Yeah.
I think travel in my younger years, before my spiritual path had emerged and been so important in my life, I think travel for fun and seeing new things was enough. Mm-hmm. Now I think travel without a purpose is not as attractive to me. So
sure.
I think there is a bit of the soul speaking when I'm making every choice in my life at this point.
Well, and part of that's just general maturity. We age into our Saturn. So Saturn rules old age. So
hey.
Oh no. So no, but I think it's just fair to say, that's just. I mean, I'm not trying to make any comments about your age.
Yeah, sure, Molly.
No, but I think just as we age, of course, we come into our elderhood, I mean, and I'm not trying to say that's where you're at, but yeah, there starts to be little, I just think we take more responsibility for ourselves. I mean, not everybody, of course, but the general idea is that, is that we're learning as we move through the life. So when we come back and then just talk about travel for you for a minute, just general kind of everyday ninth house stuff, travel, education, basic kind of everyday spiritual stuff. Of course, then I'm looking at the sign, because there's nothing in your ninth house. It's empty. There's no planets there. So this is a great example of where then I look at, there's Sagittarius on the cusp of that house, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So I will go look at the Jupiter to tell me about that area of your life. And he's down in the fifth house of the fifth house rules creativity and pleasure, and it's kind of the generative house. So it's, of course, all the hot and heavy stuff that happens in between the sheets falls into the fifth house. Creativity, children, again, all the generative acts fit into the fifth house. So your Jupiter being there, yeah, of course you love to go have fun, and you enjoy and you find it deeply creative to be in different places. And probably the same is true for education for you, is that you find the creativity when you're learning. Jupiter in Leo, wanting to explore the fire stuff. So Leo is a sign where we're exploring all that there has to do with vision. So when you're traveling, and again, this is where you'll be different than other people, you see things differently when you're actually traveling. Whereas other people maybe travel and they feel things differently maybe, or they're able to act in a way different when they're traveling. You actually see things differently. That's Leo, the vision, the sun. So does that make sense?
It does.
And so again, when you travel, like this is where, let's take a scenario where something happens and things get turned upside down for you, and you kind of are in one of those places that we all have where we feel a little bit off our path, knowing what we said earlier, that we don't actually, you get off, but you kind of feel like you've lost touch with it a little bit. You're probably first thing going to want to go crawl into your shell a little bit, like we talked about, kind of regenerate at home a little bit. And then once you're ready, once you feel emotionally able, I would totally recommend you to go to a place that you feel curious about and where you feel like is another place that can bring you creativity, because creativity, of course, brings us vitality. And then for you specifically, vision. So for you travel probably is a place where you get new ideas when you travel. Not everybody does. So that's kind of what I would have to say about that, kind of in relation to, what we talked about earlier about kind of the deeper Saturn-y stuff.
Mm-hmm. All of those are true, everything you said.
So where can we probably should wrap up here in the next, few minutes, but, and then knowing that, again, just to be kind of transparent for all the listeners, we will continue this conversation and talk about some of the more private stuff that Angie was curious about once we finish the public portion of the conversation, which is only right. We all have things that we don't necessarily need everybody to hear about. So knowing that we will kind of continue in a little bit, is there anything about kind of that initial the initial inquiry around how you could continue to serve your people a little bit better? Is there anything there that you're curious to hear more about?
Well, let's just talk about this in terms of how it serves me. I think because of the path that I'm on and the work that I've done, I didn't really hear any big surprises from you, and which is good. And the work that I'm doing is my life's work for sure. But in terms of thinking about, is there anything that you would like to tell me or that you think I should know in addition to what you've said from a summary standpoint?
I think one of the things we could start to get into, and we can talk about this a little bit later, is some of the timing stuff. In terms of where you're at right now, I think, and typically, and then another thing to kind of say is we've spent about 45, 50 minutes now talking about this stuff, and the sessions that I do typically last about 75 to 90 minutes, so there is kind of this whole other chapter that we get into where we do get a little bit more into kind of the specifics of what's going on right now. What I would say is that I think now, you had talked about feeling like you're kind of at maybe the end of this, kind of a big transformative period. And I would agree with that. I think that period is still lasting probably into next summer. So I would say there's still probably, 6 to 9 months left of this. You had kind of said when we were talking earlier that you kind of felt things were kind of getting bigger, and then you thought, oh, God, this is awesome, and then it kind of got bigger, and you were like, oh, my God, no, but this is even better. And I think that level of transformation probably is going to continue on for another few months.
It's just amazing. Like for any of you out there joining us, like in this conversation, like when you think your life is amazing and then it gets better and better, that's what we're talking about. What Molly's referring to is when you think, well, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so what I would say then in terms of practicalities is, I would say if you have the ability to plan, speaking of travel, if you have the ability to do a trip, maybe like next spring or, early or late spring, to somewhere that you feel like right now, maybe not a place that 5 years ago or a year ago or in the future might make you curious. If you really got like, where have I, or maybe even take the next couple of weeks or next couple of months and pay attention to where all of a sudden are you curious about that you weren't curious about before. Start to pay attention. Start to see what shows up. Start to see like what little signals, what name of place starts to show up a lot for you. Where's a place that you hadn't really thought of going that people start referring to that you kind of noticed your body perk up. And maybe see if you can plan a trip there. It would be interesting to see, knowing that you have still a little bit more unfolding to do, and knowing that travel, it sounds like, does help you be creative and vision, to kind of actually get a little conscious of that and go, okay, so then I think I need to kind of figure out one trip next spring. And this year that you have just finished up, I think has had some big stuff happen professionally. And I think, I don't necessarily need to hear what that is, but if there's like been some opportunities that have shown up in this last year, because you're just at the tail end of your year. And I always tell people the birthdays, of course, is a new year. So when I talk about years, I'm talking about birthday to birthday. So you're just here a few more weeks in your 2014 year. And so in that year, there would have been some professional things getting bigger professionally. And I would just kind of encourage you to really make note of what those things are specifically. And then, again, you've probably done this. How are you wanting to carry those forward? And where are you curious? What do you have left to within maybe these career changes? Where are you still not sure? And sometimes it's hard to sit in the unsure places because there's anxiety. But where, I would really encourage you to spend this last few months of this transition leaning into any places that you still see fear and kind of going for it.
Very exciting.
Does that make sense? I mean, can you think of...
It does.
Okay.
It does.
Yeah, you don't have to say specifically, but as long as there's something specific, and I'm not kind of talking about, I'm just going to stay open. I'm talking about, like, if there's a specific thing that you feel like still needs work, I would say, the next few months is when you want to really delve into that.
Right. So let's just talk a little bit about, you said you're just finishing up your 2014 year, mm-hmm. and in the work that you do, so based on the birth date, is there 11/2/2014? Is there something that date would say about what 2014 was for?
Well, so basically what we do is, within 24 hours of your birthday, because we have leap years, the sun comes back to its exact position that it was, at the moment you were born. And so that we have a chart that produces. So it's called a solar return chart. It's actually why we say to people, and many happy returns, because what we're saying to them is I hope you have many more happy solar returns. And we can have a Venus return. You have every month a lunar return. So you can have you have a Saturn return about when you turn 30 and about when you again in your late 50s. So every time a planet comes back to its natal position, we can make a chart. And so really that, anytime you have a birthday, so last year on on November, so let me look at the chart and tell you if it was actually on the 2nd, because of leap years, sometimes it's the day before or the day after. And last year, it was actually in the morning of November 2nd. And so it's not one thing that it says. Again, each year we're looking at the whole chart, and there's things that I look for as an astrologer. There's patterns that I'm looking for. And so that's where I'm saying I see something that it just looks like last year was there were some big things that happened for you professionally. And then, there's kind of some other things I would say, but I will probably say those after we're into the private section of our talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I, fair enough. And then I think then when we see, kind of something happening that's maybe a big professional movement, and then, I'm going to look at the next year and kind of go, okay, then what? What does the next chapter say? And I think, again, I think we'll kind of continue this after the public portion is done. But I think that there's a way in which this year that's coming up, there is a highlight on this Mars in Virgo, this way that you act in a particular way. And so knowing that, I would say, gosh, I'm not a big goal-setting person, and I'm not a big, plan out your year kind of a person, but I would say knowing that there's a focus on your ability to articulate movement, this might be a year to set some goals here in the next few weeks on your birthday. And to pay attention to more than even setting goals. As the year develops, pay extra attention to to the fruits of your ability to be articulate with your actions. For better or worse, where does it get you into trouble when you're really particular about the way that you act? When does it pay you dividends? And I think it's going to be a year where you're going to kind of be super duper Angie-ness. If that makes any sense.
Watch out.
So, but in particular in relation to that Marsy thing. So, you may see an extra amount of energy next year than you normally have. You may find yourself, some years you might be, if you look back at your personal history, you may have years or periods of time where you weren't necessarily being really fastidious in your actions. That would not be the case in this next year. You're going to be really kind of Virgo or Marsy and Virgo-y-ish. So kind of, that's how when we look forward, we kind of look at again, we're looking at the signatures and we're kind of going, okay, this is what's highlighted. So let me pay attention to that. Mars in Virgo is one of your main, he's not your strongest planet, but he's one of your main planets that really talks about you. And so again, I just think that there's going to be this highlight on you next year. We'll talk more about that when we get into the private piece.
Okay.
So as it pertains to the client-y type stuff, is there anything left that you're curious to hear more about?
I think I'm good. I think it would serve the folks that are listening to our discussion for us to talk just a little bit about this reading in comparison to maybe what theirs would be like. Mm-hmm. Not from a logistical standpoint, but
a qualitative standpoint.
Well, from a standpoint that not everybody's going to be doing life purpose work like I am.
Sure.
And I have a pretty big calling that I've stepped deeply into. So I think you've talked about some very deep things with me that you may or may not get into when you're doing these types of astrological readings with others. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes and no. Every chart is different. Every person is different, and everybody has a particular thing that shows up. And so I'm not going to be talking about the things that I've spoken with you about. And if anybody listens to this that's had a reading with me already, they're going to be like, oh wow, that's so different from what we talked about in my session. And so, for some people, Venus is their big thing. And so we spend a lot of time talking about peace, love, and happiness because they're totally Venusian. For some people, they're like totally Mercury people, and so we spend a lot of time talking about their communication patterns and how they express themselves. So everybody's different, and I think that's what, to me, keeps me, because, of course, I'm also in some way very interested in purpose, and my work is really about helping people see the context of who they are. So, you and I, our work is kind of parallel. So there is a way in which each person that comes to me, we spend a lot of time talking about those specific patterns and where they've gotten to in the development of those patterns. And then, that last half hour, 45 minutes, we do start to really talk about, okay, so what are you working on right now? How can we apply what we've just talked about who you are and what your, purpose is, and for better or worse. And like some people have got big tempers that show up that they don't like to talk about, and I'll be like, yeah, we need to talk about your temper. So there's everybody's got kind of stuff that is gonna show up, and so we will again talk about it generally, and then and talk about what their specifics are, and then we'll jump into what's actually going on right now. What's the problem that you're stuck on? And how can we kind of chew on that a little bit more? And, for you, the thing that we were going to talk about is kind of a more personal thing. So, so I'm kind of reserving, and I can see that there's stuff going on around that right now. And so, for other people, there will be more of what they won't hear right now, which is that let's kind of make a plan of action going forward. I'm really clear that when people walk away from this session, they've got homework. They've got things they're going to go do or pay attention to moving forward. Because I'm just really practical that way. Right.
I'm sure that's what your chart says.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this up for this show today. Do you have anything else that you would like to mention before we end?
I think we're good. I think the one thing to mention, I guess, is if there's the first 5 people out there who are curious to potentially have a session, if they want to write me an email at molly@mollymorrissey.com and mention this podcast with you, they'll get 20% off that birth chart session.
Right. And we encourage you to go listen to episode 53 again that we recorded yesterday that talks a little bit about Molly and her journey and a little bit more about this work that she does. Molly, thank you very much for demonstrating your work here live. And making me feel very comfortable about putting myself on the stage that could be a little bit gentle.
Well, I'm glad that you felt comfortable. Sometimes, it's hard to know exactly where we're going to go, and so I tried to kind of talk about things that were important but that would be good for public consumption. Great.
So we'll end here for today. You can visit Molly's website at mollymorrissey.com. Again, you can find some of what we talked about today at our show notes at lifepurposeadvisor.com/54. You've been listening to Angie Swartz here with Molly Morrissey on the Life Purpose Advisor podcast. If you're interested in more information about working with me on finding your life purpose, you can contact me at Angie@lifepurposeadvisor.com and sign up for our free self-study at lifepurposeadvisor.com. Thanks for listening to our special edition. I look forward to hearing from you and understanding how well you liked this special edition. So reach out on social media or send me an email, and we will see you next time.